福島県民は暮らしも生き方も生きがいもたくさん奪われました。私は日本国中の原発を止めたいと思っています。皆さん一緒に立ち上がりませんか？
日本中の皆さん、福島原発の事故は一人一人が当事者です。どうしたら日本中、そして世界中の原発を止めることができるのか、一人一人が自分の頭で考えましょ
う。そして一緒に子どもたちを守りましょう。
This is Hamaoka from the air. It's on the ocean, and the 4 reactors you can see. These are the 4 reactors, and these are the turbine buildings where the steam is piped there to turn the turbines to produce electricity. After 90 minutes after cooling stops in a nuclear power plant, the reactors go into meltdown. Now, after the accident, the cooling systems did not work for almost 24 hours. They couldn't get the backup systems to work. The pump for the cooling systems that operate normally is down close to the ocean. It's right on the beach. So that got flooded and destroyed by the tsunami. The first backup system is diesel, and that's in the basement underneath the reactor. And after a 32 or 34-foot wave tsunami went over that building, it flooded that system. Then there was the battery backup system. They couldn't get that to work. So almost 24 hours after the earthquake, they still did not have cooling in those reactors. So they were actually in advanced stages of meltdown. In September, TEPCO secretly put MOX fuel in unit number 3. MOX fuel is mixed uranium and oxide. It's extremely dangerous. It's very hazardous when it escapes into the environment, and it's very hot and hard to control. That was unit number 3, which was the second one that blew up. That's the plutonium and uranium oxide and spent fuel rods, detritus and dust and smoke that's going up into the air. And that has now contaminated the whole northern hemisphere.
Das war's. Heute wissen wir, dass liegen jetzt auf dem Meeresboden und verrosten und so ganz langsam
それでも原発は必要だっていう方向に行かないように政府もそれから私たち国民県民市民もなっていってほしい
思いというか、私たちは止められる、変 変わっていけるし、そういう力がそれぞれにあるんだっていうことをみんな自分の中に思ってくれればいいし、
子供をまず避難させてから水をかけるんです。消すんです。子供の中に置いたままいくら水かけたってそんなの助けられない。家なんか燃えちゃったっていいんです。命さえ立つ。
The meltdowns at Fukushima earlier this year are the world's
worst. そのためには、情報を隠す、あるいは、例えばその農作物とか食品の汚染に関しても
していません。早く受診をしてください。原発事故で避難する人は学校の友達、家などを奪われました。
思いません。私は6月に転校してとても悲しい思いをしました。友達も泣いて別れを惜しんでくれました。そして私の前と後にも何人かの友達が転校していきました。こんな風にだんだんみんながバラバラになっていくのは私たちにとって耐え難く悲しいことです。出て行った人も残っている人もお互いのことが心配でたまりません。ですから私たちが学校の友達とみんなで一緒に安全な場所に避難できるよう真剣に考えてください。そしてみんなが避難している間に学校も田畑も森も山も川も島県全域を徹底的にきれいにする計画を立ててそれを実行してください。私の友達を仲間たちを絶対に誰一人傷つけないでください。私たちが将来本当に安心して暮らせるように今できる最大限の努力をしてください。よろしくお願いします。
すごく愛されているタレントであったりとか有名なその俳優であったりとかそういう人たちの口からそれらが伝えられてくるのですごくパワフルにそのプロパガンダというものが効いてきた。そういうスティグマみたいなものがやっぱりペタペタっと原発に反対する人に貼られていたので人々はそれが怖いだからシーっていう感じで、反対する人たちに関してはそういうカラーをつけてもうそのステレオタイプの中にはめ込むし。
For Natural News, it's dated February 25th, 2014. Radiation contaminated more than 20,000 square miles and 43 million people in Japan, says the EU report. In the 3 months following the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster, which occurred back in March 2011, a land area larger than 20,000 square miles became contaminated with high levels of radionuclides of both cesium and iodine. Says in iodine, many other radioactive particles emitted from Fukushima. Okay, so we have other radioactive particles not included here. But these estimates are very likely understated, as separate calculations suggest that radioactive emissions were likely 5 times higher, at least, than the emission estimates used for the study. Based on these more realistic figures, the contamination range was likely far higher, measuring some 56,000 kilometers, 21,000 miles, and affecting around 43 million Japanese people. And this estimate only accounts for radioactive cesium and iodine, just 2 of the many radioactive particles emitted from Fukushima. Since measurement tools for radioactive strontium and other isotopes are not in use or do not exist, the full extent of Fukushima radiation cannot be fully ascertained, which means it can only be assumed that radiation levels were far higher than even this groundbreaking study suggests. A separate calculation, which assumes source emissions that were 5 times greater, suggested that a relatively large and densely populated part of Japan, 56,000 square kilometers, would be classified as contaminated, adds the study announcement. This highlights the uncertainty that is integral to both measuring and modeling emissions, particularly for iodine radionuclides, and the need for more accurate estimates of the emissions. You can view the full study as it was published in the journal Atmospheric Chemistry and Physics right here, and there's the link for that. You can also view an earlier study published in the same journal by the same authors, revealing similar findings. Yep, and just imagine what it's doing to the entire planet, folks, and the oceans. It's unbelievable and very serious.
under China, with Japan bobbing on top of it. The North American plate is moving south, and the China plate is moving east. So it's a terrible, terrible plate. It would be like trying to crawl on top of a gunny sack with about 5 big hogs in it, all wiggling and jumping around and pushing each other. And I'd like to see you or me or anyone try to stay on top of that gunny sack. So that's basically the tectonic setting of Japan. And the Hamaoka plate is near the junction of 3 plates. I was able to get the Tokyo Electric Power Company map, which has the faults and the strata, the geologic layers or rock types and everything on it, because that's what TEPCO submitted to the Japanese government in order to operate, for the license to operate Hamaoka. So I went to Hamaoka and I had a press conference there. And then I went to the prefecture headquarters where the governor and the prefecture government operates, and I had another press conference there. And I had walked all around Hamaoka the day before and collected rocks and took pictures and observed the intake and exhaust pipes. They're huge. They're twice as wide as this room. They consume huge amounts of water for the cooling systems. And I held up the map and showed all the reporters what it looked like, and I said, can you see the faults on this map? Can you see how the reactors are carefully placed between the faults? They said, yeah. And I said, instead of the rocks lying flat like they're supposed to, they're standing on their sides. And I said, this is not a safe place to build a nuclear power plant. And they said, but TEPCO told us it was safe. So I took a baggie out of my backpack and I held up a baggie and I said, these are the rocks that those reactors are sitting on. And I took a rock out and I crumbled it like sugar. And they said, we're all going to write stories about this. And all of them wrote articles that were in the Japan newspapers the next day. Even the most conservative one, the Yomiuri News, which was started by a military war crimes character who was very pro-nuclear power, and he used the Yomiuri News to promote nuclear power in Japan and sell it to the public. Even their reporter wrote an article about it. So here we have a country that is just an accident waiting to happen. And I wrote a 2004 article for the Japan Times after the Hamaoka visit, and I hope all of you will read it. It's in English on the internet, and it's called Japan's Deadly Game of Nuclear Roulette. Now the tragic thing is that every nuclear power plant can be converted to natural gas, because all that reactor does is boil water to turn the turbines to produce electricity. You can take the reactor out, put a gas burner in, produce 8 times more energy, much cheaper, eliminate the environmental hazard of the emissions, because all of the radiation from operations every day goes up the stack. And it ends up in all the fields and the food and in the water, drinking water, and in babies' teeth. I've collected 6,000 baby teeth from children living around nuclear power plants in the U.S. with a small group of scientists. Dr. Ernest Sternglass is one of them, and he helped to convince the Senate to sign the Partial Test Ban Treaty in 1963. I also collected baby teeth in Japan, in Tokyo, and the radiation levels were the same as for children living around nuclear power plants in the U.S. The 2 babies that had the highest strontium-90 levels in their baby teeth were born in Washington, D.C. So, nuclear power is not compatible with life, with welfare, with good health, but it sure is compatible with bankers, and that's why we have it. And the other reason we have it is because Queen Elizabeth, I call her Queenie, owns all of the mineral rights to 27 countries, the British Isles, and many territories, the Commonwealth. And she even owns the mineral rights to the international maritime limits, which are 200 miles offshore. So all the wind farms, the BP oil platforms offshore, they all belong to her personally. She owns over 35 trillion, she owns land worth over $35 trillion. She's the richest person in the world. And she has huge, huge uranium deposits in Canada, in Australia, in other countries. And it's completely worthless dust unless you have an industry, even a fraudulent and corrupt industry, that gives you a way to sell it. That's nuclear power.
世界で一番危険な原発はどこかと聞かれたらやはり浜岡だと言わざるを得ない。
It's the night of